Welcome to the Global News Podcast on YouTube, where we go behind the headlines of a story and why it matters. On this episode, we're discussing the visit of the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. He's visiting Donald Trump in Washington, and it's his mission to reclaim his place on the world stage after the uproar caused by the 2018 killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. It looks like Saudi Arabia's de facto ruler is expected to get the pomp and pageantry of a lavish welcome when he meets Donald Trump at the White House in his first visit to the US since the killing of the high-profile Saudi critic. So, what might the two leaders discuss? Well, they are expected to sign deals on defence and civilian nuclear power in what seems to be a sign of how the Saudi leader has been rehabilitated in the eyes of the Trump administration. And what about the role of Saudi Arabia in the Middle East and how it might help in carrying out Trump's peace plan for Gaza? To discuss this further, I've got our State Department correspondent Tom Bateman, who's on the line from Washington, and Rushdie Abu Alouf, our Gaza correspondent, who's based in Istanbul. Tom, let's kick off with Mohammed bin Salman and how, in the eyes of Donald Trump, he's managed to rehabilitate his image and gain this lavish welcome to the White House.
Well, that started in 2018 when, as you've mentioned, the Saudi dissident and columnist who was based in the United States, wrote for the Washington Post newspaper, was murdered and his body dismembered by Saudi agents at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, as I say, back in 2018. Now, after that, there was global outrage and really a sense of isolation for Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince. An intelligence assessment by the CIA concluded that he had approved the operation that led to Khashoggi's death. And although he always denied any prior knowledge, he did later say that he took responsibility for it as the leader of the country. Now, what then happened over the next few years into the Biden administration? You had a President Joe Biden who campaigned on the idea of making Saudi Arabia a pariah over that issue, but also the US supply of weapons to Saudi Arabia, given its role in the war in Yemen, came under increasing question, a lot of pressure from Democrats during the administration. And in the end, the Biden administration cut off offensive weapons, as they put it then, to the Saudis. The major turning point in all of this strategically was the Russian invasion of Ukraine, because that caused a global surge in the price of fuel. So gas prices were going up in the US. Joe Biden went to Saudi Arabia in 2022, and then you saw this sort of start of a rehabilitation of Mohammed bin Salman in the eyes of the West. There was very famously, or perhaps notoriously, a fist bump between President Biden and the Crown Prince when he visited Riyadh. And then you saw a process really of reintegration back into the fold of the Americans and the West more broadly. And then into this second Trump term, what has happened? I mean, one of the big changes has been caused by the war in Gaza, and the role of the Saudis has become absolutely critical in the American-led attempts to try to get the ceasefire and a broader stabilization of that situation. So they have lent heavily on the Saudis. And then you have all the personal and business connections between Mr. Trump and crucially his family, and not just the Saudis, but a lot of Gulf Arab leaders. And so here I think you see the sort of zenith of that process with Mohammed bin Salman coming to Washington for the first time in 7 years. In all but name a state visit for the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, visiting the White House. And there will be an announcement about the things that the Saudi Crown Prince wants for Saudi Arabia, and in return, multi-billion-dollar investments from Riyadh into the United States.
So it is quite the turnaround then from a Saudi perspective, from a Mohammed bin Salman perspective as well. And you outlined how that's happened. But I guess now when they both sit down together, the two leaders, what will the objectives be as well? Because there are some fears as well from the American side, particularly from some defense officials.
Yeah, I mean, what Mohammed bin Salman wants, three things broadly. He wants a defence pact, a security deal with the United States. It looks as though he'll get something like that, which would effectively say that the US would support the Saudis militarily if the country ever came under attack. Now, President Trump signed a similar arrangement recently with Qatar. That was after the Israelis attacked Doha, you'll remember, a few months back. So the Saudis want something like that. That will be probably an executive order, so it won't have all the backing of a proper congressionally backed treaty, and a future president could in effect undo that. But that's very important to the Saudis. They also want to buy F-35s, the most advanced American fighter jet. The reason that's regionally important is because the Americans have never allowed other countries in the region, aside from Israel, to have the same level of military hardware. Now, only the Israelis have F-35 jets in the Middle East, so that has the potential to change the regional balance of military power and, crucially, Israel's aerial superiority in the region. The other thing that Mohammed bin Salman wants is access to American nuclear technology. They want to start a civilian nuclear power program, so nuclear energy, basically, for Saudi Arabia. They say they have no intentions to later weaponize that kind of a program. But all of these things very contentious for some of the reasons I mentioned before, the concerns about increased levels of arms supply to the Saudis. In return, the Saudi leadership is touting a $600 billion investment into the US in areas across the economy that builds on a huge amount of sovereign wealth investment that the Saudis have already made into the United States. So quite a transactional deal going on, but the Americans see it as part of their security interests to have an increasingly strong relationship with the Saudis to try and offset Chinese influence, for example, in the region, and crucially to build a more secure Middle East, in their eyes, against the threat of the Iranians. So lots of strategic interest going on. The big thing that President Trump would want, the big prize, would be to get a normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. But that is not on the cards at the moment, namely because the Saudis would demand an independent Palestinian state as a quid pro quo of such a deal. And certainly the current Israeli government is in no way going to accept that.
Okay, let's get another perspective then from Rushdie Abu Alouf, our Gaza correspondent based in Istanbul. Rushdie, I guess going forward then, what sort of a role could Saudi Arabia play when it comes to the conversation in terms of carrying out the next phase of President Trump's peace plan, and how would this affect the region?
Since the beginning of the war, the Saudis have been supplying Gaza with a lot of aid coming through Egypt into Gaza. They were not involved in the ongoing negotiation to secure the ceasefire, but they were supporting the effort. And we have seen the Saudis backing the U.S. resolution yesterday, and even before, during the first stage of the ceasefire, where the Saudis were involved in making this happening, and they seems to be willing to take part in this. And the people in Gaza, they believe that without the Saudis, it is going to be very hard to rebuild Gaza, given the special relation between the Saudi king and the Saudi crown prince and the Americans. And we are going to see the crown prince in the White House, and the people in Gaza hope that he will discuss in detail the plan for Gaza.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Rushdie. And you can hear more on this story and other global news on the Global News Podcast. You can download that from wherever you get your podcasts from. And please do subscribe to our YouTube channel and give this episode a like. And please do leave a comment below. You can tell us if there are any stories you feel that we should be covering. Thanks so much for watching.